Hello and welcome to another episode of Sermon Supplementals with me, Pastor Tom. In each new episode, we will explore a biblical idea based on the previous Sunday's Gospel reading. This week, I'm coming to you each day with an insightful exploration of the events of that day in Holy Week timeline according to Mark's chronology. In this episode, we are concentrating on the events of Holy Tuesday, and in particular, the confrontation between Jesus and the chief priests over whether one should pay taxes. This day marks only 2 days before Jesus is betrayed and 3 days before he is hung on the cross. It was also a very busy day for Jesus. The writer of the Gospel of Mark needed a total of 115 verses to cover all the events of the day. Mark's coverage of this day was longer than Maundy Thursday and Good Friday combined. About 2/3 of the day's coverage consists of conflicts between Jesus and the temple authorities and their henchmen. The remaining third warns of destruction of the temple and Jerusalem. The day begins with a flashback to the previous day when the disciples see the fig tree withering away to its roots. Once again, the imagery of the dying tree is a reminder of the temple and its authorities. As the day progresses, Jesus and his disciples make their way to the Temple Mount, where they are challenged by the temple authorities and their associates. Let's take a moment to understand the geography of the Temple Mount. Temple Mount is the term most people use to refer to the entire temple complex. It was built on Mount Zion, the same temple top that the Jews believed Abraham almost sacrificed Isaac, and the Muslims believe that in a night flight, the horse of Muhammad last touched earth on Mount Zion, or what they call Mount Moriah. By the time of Christ, the temple had grown to be multiple acres large. On the periphery of Temple Mount were high, thick walls that housed offices and meeting spaces. The main offices of the Sadducees, Pharisees, and other high priests officials were located in the offices on the south wall of the Temple Mount. Most of the open-aired top of Temple Mount consisted of the courts of the Gentiles, where Jews and non-Jews were welcomed. In this area, the money changers and animal merchants transacted their business. Almost in the exact center of Temple Mount stood the building that housed the sanctuary where the priests did their liturgies. Deep inside the sanctuary was the Holy of Holies, where the Spirit of God dwelled above the Ark of the Covenant. The Holy Holies were hidden from the sanctuary by a foot-thick purple drape. Temple Mount on Passover week was often very busy, and all around the courts of the Gentiles, rabbis and teachers of the faith held classes and lectures. Thus, in many ways, Jesus going up to the Temple Mount was not unique and unexpected. However, considering what he did the day before by turning over tables and disrupting business as usual, he was not exactly the most welcomed or liked individual. Inevitably, he was going to get questioned and challenged. The first challenge came from the temple authorities, especially the elders and the scribes. Mark records in chapter 11 that they confront Jesus by asking him about his authority to teach and do what he does. Obviously, still smarting from the previous day's violent act of cleansing, but instead of answering their question, Jesus turns and asks them a question. I don't want to focus this episode on this particular challenge, but suffice it to say, in the end, Jesus puts them on the defensive, and they slink back into the crowd. The next challenge is the critical one of the day, and how Jesus handles this challenge reveals a lot about his deep understanding of the Israelite culture and the drama within it, between the Roman occupiers and the Jewish population of Israel. Not too long after this first recorded challenge, the group of Pharisees and Herodians approached Jesus with entrapment in mind. they test him about taxes. They asked him whether it is lawful to pay taxes to the governor or not. Jesus asks for a piece of Roman currency, a denarius, and asks them whose head was on the coin. When they said it was the emperor, Jesus spoke the immortal lines that all Christians and non-Christians know. Give to Caesar's that which is Caesar's, and give to God that are God's. Or most people know it as render unto Caesar's which is Caesar's, and render unto God which is God's. Mark records that the Pharisees and Herodians were speechless and amazed. Over the years and centuries, this response of Christ has taken on life of its own and not necessarily understood correctly by even the most faithful adherents to Christ's teachings. For many, this statement is the definitive statement for the separation of church and state. For others, this statement has been taken to have a strong or a more Augustinian understanding of two worlds, one world of humans and one world of the divine, or two realms of human life, one religious and the other political. Sadly, this response of Christ has been used by dictators and malevolent powers to legitimize their absolute control in their countries. The Nazis understood this text to mean that everyone needed to be absolutely obedient to the state. During the Civil Rights era, many American Christians used this response of Christ to criticize the various acts of civil disobedience. Sadly, the various interpretation over the course of time has clouded what it actually means in the Gospel of Mark. First of all, the Pharisees were a Jewish movement committed to the intensification of traditional religious practices, including Sabbath observance and purity laws. Not only were these part of the covenant with God given to Moses at Mount Sinai, but they were a form of resistance to assimilation to Hellenistic, or that is Greek, and Roman cultural imperialism. Though we know very little about the Herodians, they were, as the name implies, supporters of Herod Antipas, the royal family of rulers appointed by Rome. Both here and in chapter 3 and chapter 8 of his Gospel, Mark reports that these two groups were allied with each other and in league with the authorities. They asked Jesus a question intended to trap him in what he said. They begin with a fawning prologue. "Teacher, we know that you are sincere and show deference to no one. For you do not regard people with partiality, but teach the way of God in accordance with truth." Then they asked him, "Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar's? Should we pay them or should we not?" basically is what they asked. It was a volatile question. Ever since the Jewish homeland had been added to the Roman Empire in 63 BC, Rome had required a large annual tribute from the Jewish people. Rome did not collect tribute directly from its individual subjects. Rather, local authorities were responsible for its payment and collection. And in our passage, it is they who send the Pharisees and Herodians to Jesus. The tribute included the per capita or head tax levied on all adult Jewish men. The annual sum due to Rome included much more. Most of this was gathered through taxes on land and agricultural production. All of this together contributed to the quote-unquote tribute to Rome. It was the way the empire profited from its possessions. Roman taxation was onerous not only because it was economically burdensome, it also symbolized the Jewish homeland's lack of sovereignty. It underlined the oppression of the Jews by an alien lord, as the word tribute itself suggests. The spokesmen of the authorities set the trap skillfully. Either answer would get Jesus into trouble. If Jesus were to answer no, he could get charged with advocating denial of Roman authority, in short, with sedition. If he were to answer yes, he risked discrediting himself with the crowd, who for both economic and religious reasons resented Roman rule and taxation. Most likely, this was the primary purpose of the question, to separate Jesus from the crowd by leading him into an unpopular response. Jesus' response is masterful. As he did in the question about the authority in the earlier challenge, he turns the situation back on his opponents. He sets a counter trap when he asks to see a denarius. A denarius was a silver coin equal to the approximately a day's wage. His interrogators produced one. Jesus looks at it and then asks, "Whose head is this, and whose title?" Or in the words of an older translation, "Whose image and inscription is this?" And we all know the answer. The emperor's. Jesus' strategy has led his questioners to disclose to the crowd that they have a coin with Caesar's image on it. In this moment, they, the temple folks, are discredited. Why? In the Jewish homeland in the 1st century, there were 2 types of coins. One type, because of the Jewish prohibition of graven images, had no human or animal images. The second type, including Roman coinage, had images. Many Jews would not carry or use coins of the second type, but Jesus' interrogators in the story did. The coins they produced had Caesar's image along with the standard and idolatrous inscription heralding Caesar as divine and Son of God. They are exposed as part of the politics of collaboration. Jesus' rhetorical strategy is brilliant. Their trap has been evaded. His own counter-trap was set and sprung. Thus, even before the famous words about rendering to Caesar, Jesus has won the encounter. But there is more. He responds to their initial question. His response is in 2 parallel halves. Give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and then give to God the things that are God. Following immediately upon the disclosure that they are carrying a coin with Caesar's image, the first half of the saying means simply, it's Caesar's coin. Give it back to him. This is in effect a non-answer to the larger question, should we pay taxes to Caesar's? It cannot be seen as an endorsement of paying taxes to Rome or of Roman's rule. If Jesus had to say, pay taxes to Caesar, he could simply have answered yes to their question. There would have been no need for the scene with the coin, the central element of the story. The non-answer is not simply a dismissal of the issue, however. The second half of Jesus' response is both evocative and provocative. Give to God the things that are God's. It raises questions. What belongs to God and what belongs to Caesar's? For Jesus and many of his Jewish contemporaries, everything belongs to God. So their sacred scripture affirmed, the land of Israel belongs to God. Recall Leviticus 25:23, which says that all tenant farmers or resident aliens on land that belongs to God. To use Tuesday's language earlier, the vineyard belongs to God, not to the local collaborators, not to Rome. Indeed, the whole earth belongs to God. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the psalmist wrote in Psalm 23. So what belongs to Caesar's? The implication is clear. Absolutely nothing. And what belongs to God? All good Jews of Jesus' time, and for all readers of the Bible, know the answer to this, is that everything belongs to the Lord of life. Go in peace.